Welcome to the CG Pro podcast. This is episode 61, and today we have a very special guest, Mr. Barry St. John, who is a good friend of mine, and we've worked together in the past. Barry is a virtual production and visual effects producer, has worked on some awesome movies and projects like The Lion King and the new Lion King, Mufasa the Lion King, and many other things as well. Barry's a force of nature. It's a pleasure to have you on today, Barry. I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you very much, man. Appreciate being here. And that's very electric music you have going into that, right? I was over here grooving. You have me got me all excited, Ed.
Good. I'm glad to hear it, Mr. Jameson Ray, who wrote that.
Nice.
Cool. So, yeah, it's great to have you on. I mean, we've spent a bunch of time together on movie sets, and it's really cool to be able to have this conversation. I'd love to start off just asking you a little bit about how you got into this whole mess in the first place. Was it a childhood dream? Was there some movies that made you want to get into this? Was it an accident?
I always wanted to speak with animals and make speaking animal movies. No, not quite. I stumbled my way in along with half the other people in this industry, right? When I was growing up, we weren't thinking about virtual production at all, especially. But yeah, I was originally in camera and lighting, and from a very technical background. The director and people I used to work for were all into vintage film camera, everything had to be authentic to the original film look of things. I worked in photography for a little while in New York and all that, and stumbled into visual effects, luckily through my mentor, who I love dearly, my dearest of friends, Joyce Cox, who I rode her coattails for a long time. And when she retired, I just kind of went along with the coattails. As she went off, I just kept continuing forward and was very fortunate to be in some places to be able to move forward through that. So I never really was a technical visual effects guy. I came from practical background, but fell into it and loved it and think the world of it now. And now they're going to have to drag me out of it soon. So, yeah. And I have to apologize because that picture you put out there, I was much blacker beard then, right? So that's like false advertisement, Ed. This is what visual effects really does to you, is it makes you gray and old and decrepit. So everyone can look forward to that.
Well, it's a great advertisement for joining the industry to anyone out there, for sure. Yeah, I got a few less hairs and a few more gray ones.
Yeah. Yep.
How about before that? Did you study to get into film and production in the first place?
I did indeed. When I was probably in middle school, probably 6th grade, 7th grade, MTV was just at its peak, right? And they came out with those first VHS cameras, and my friend's parents bought one, and us kids used and abused that thing, and we made all of our own music videos and stuff like that. And it was an instant passion. I grew up from a background probably really loving the escapism of movies and MTV and getting away from tiny old little Kansas where I grew up, mentally, kind of transporting myself into the worlds that were being created and put in front of us. And it was instant love, to be honest. I think from an early age, I knew that I wanted to be working in this medium. And I didn't know how, where, why, when. But when I went to school, in high school, we did a lot of live broadcasts, same music videos, made a couple shorts and stuff like that. Got a grant as a junior and senior in high school. Got a small scholarship. Went to film school at Kansas University, home of the Jayhawks. Went to their tiny little, rock chalk. Went there and we studied. I had plenty of really wonderful teachers, but I had this teacher named Ed Small, and we used to learn how to shoot 16 millimeter film on the old Bell & Howell wind-up cameras. And the very first test was you have to carry this camera into him, right? And if you were not carrying it correctly, he would kick you out, very angrily kick you out of the room, right? But I think it actually taught me a lot, which is now helping in virtual production, is about the planning and the foresight and all the stuff that goes into it, actually, right? So that lesson, while I was on a very, old film camera, it's actually very useful, I think, for these things, because I don't build tools. I'm not in the engine doing anything right now, but I'm the guy nagging everybody with the plan. What are we planning for? What are we planning for? And I think that's the biggest thing I probably have to offer in all this, is like the attention to the detail, getting to actually making it, the planning of it, right? But yeah, so I fell into it early. I knew I loved it. I didn't know I was going to end up in VFX or virtual production. It was a matter of luck, happenstance, love, and it's just one of those paths kept leading to one place to another. So, yeah.
That's cool. I can almost hear you on the virtual set saying, "Hey, you're carrying that virtual camera properly."
Yes. Oh man, we had so many fun times on that set, Ed.
Absolutely. So was there like so you had some experience in trying making movies and studying and being inspired by teachers, and were there any standout movies for you that you saw early on that made you want to jump in?
I was a Spielberg kid. I just immediately, everything Spielberg touched, Richard Donner, like Goonies is just one of my all-time favorites still. That little world they created, I just wanted to be one of those kids, right? And every time I watched it, I felt like I was. But that kind of Americana dreamist like mentality, I really, as a kid, I didn't really have that in my family, which is fine. I had a very loving mother and brother and extended family. But I think that always stuck with me. It's like, oh man, look at this world or this life that people are living. Like, it became such a obsession, right? And those guys were amazing. I mean, obviously Kubrick, when you start getting older, plenty of other filmmakers to mention, but I think those two in particular were the ones that really hit me over the head. And then the Coen brothers. I mean, still see The Big Lebowski probably more than any movie I've ever watched in my life. We still quote it daily here. But yeah, I think it was just when someone can create a world and wrap you into that world that deeply, I think that was the ultimate attraction. And then being able to world build in the films that we've been doing in virtual productions, where you're designing branches and sticks and everything else and landscapes and you're truly world building as you go. It just really, you get to latch on, and for 2-3 years of your life, build a world, help tell the story, help create that whole thing and bring that thing, to fruition, and work with some of the most talented, amazing people on the planet while doing so, right? Shout out to all the artists on all these films, because it's absolutely a labor of love for most of those people, and it takes a monumental effort on all parts to get these things done. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So being inspired by Spielberg to working with Spielberg, what was that like?
I mean, it was more than a dream come true, I think, for many of levels, just because in my mind it was like this ultimate thing, to be able to do. Until we're working 16-hour days, worried about the next day shoot, trying to get everything together. But I made, some of our best friends were on that film. There was the old DD crew, virtual production team, absolutely phenomenal team that's now splintered apart, but still working together with me and other people on multiple shows. But Steven is like such a dreamer, and he's such a kid, even on the set. It's just, we would get these videos from his iPhone of him scribbling storyboards with stick figures, and he's like on his yacht, and he's like drawing this image of, The Shining. If you remember Ready Player One, there's the Shining kind of tribute. And he's drawing this out, and you're like, oh my God, you can barely follow it. And he sends it off to the previs team, right, to create the animation that we'd later virtual camera, right, or later actually motion capture as well. So you're just like, God, this guy has a vision from the start to the finish, and he's executing that vision from the initial dream he has, right? which is everything you kind of imagine as you're watching it. Because I feel when you're watching his films, you kind of get caught up in a dream, and you start off with this kid's or the person's dream usually, and you usually spent the time fulfilling that dream in his stories. But he works the exact same way, and it's pretty remarkable to see. Obviously, he's got a massive team around him who are extremely talented people, but to be able to see someone bring a vision to fruition from those little stick figures, and then you go look at it later against that drawing he made, and it's the same thing, and you're like, gosh, that was pretty amazing, you know. So many times in this process in virtual production, you're finding your film as you are in a live action film. So it's not often you'll start with the storyboards of all these shots and then finish with the same shots after you've motion captured, virtual cameraed, blah, 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 that those are the same shots that were your storyboards. Usually you find something new along the path that gives you a new thread to create the scene or sequence. But Steven had it all in his head somehow, and it was kind of amazing to see. So
that's really cool. Yeah. And to hear how you can just jot it down in stick figure form, and that's a good enough way of communicating it. You don't have to be an expert illustrator to be able to get a visual idea across.
Yeah, I mean, it does help if you're handing it off to a masterful previs lead like Scott Meadows and his team that we had at Digital Domain, and did an amazing job transcribing that into something in three-dimensional form as a performance. But still, that transcended the art, right? It's all of a sudden he's becoming Steven and seeing out that vision for him. So it's pretty remarkable.
What was the process like there? Because it's an interesting movie in that sense, talking about virtual production, and that's a movie about living in a virtual world and being a sort of Tron-like world, if you like.
Yeah.
It also almost kind of like I don't know if this word's been tainted, but meta kind of experience in a way of making a movie virtually about a virtual experience.
I mean, that book, Ernest Cline wrote the book, which is basically defining what everyone's trying to do with this metaverse, right? This is the whole vision that they're trying to fulfill. But, you know, it's pretty funny to see how from that day that book came out to making the movie to where we're at now. So much of what, I mean, you ask most people, what is the metaverse? And everyone's like, I don't know, you know. But they're really just chasing to get back to that world where everyone lives in goggles and can order anything they want at any given point and explore the world and be whoever they want to be and create their own identity and their own world and their own blah, 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 and have a complete universe that's based off of you, right? Or you're participating in someone else's universe, right? But the technology that went with it then compared to now has taken a monumental leap, I will say. The game engine stuff is just, it's going faster and faster every year and better every year. You know, now you have a lot more access to all these things. What would probably taken us so many more artists on Ready Player One to accomplish what we were accomplishing now is a little bit more available, I would say. But what the hardest part about all of that is none of it's really set up to handle a massive film like that. And on Ready Player One particularly, trying to get something you motion capture right now with 6 different characters into a tent for them to virtual camera like right after, you know, it takes a army of people constantly shuttling all this data and tracking all this data and having databases to be able to know which they're pulling from. It's like, no, I want these 2 performances from this take, those 2 from that, these 2 from this, and put them all in this scene file, and I want to shoot it at lunchtime. It's 10:30. And you're like, oh, God, sure. Which, you know, people aren't running around with paper and pencil, right? They're on iPads and laptops, you know, and databases, tagging and flagging all this stuff. And then it has to get to as a work order to an artist for them to be able to do it. And then it has to get signed off by the supervisor. And then you have to push it to the virtual camera tent and all these things, right? So it is its own little like universe of data that's happening within that, but it's throwing you into this world, right? You're creating this world as you go, as you motion capture and then shoot the film. So it's a very laborious process for all that to happen. It's not like you're just participating in the world, but I'm sure for Steven, he kind of felt the flavor like he was just participating in the world. He would sit there with his virtual camera as people are motion capturing and everything and see how that performances are playing out on the digital characters through his camera. And then he'd be able to recamera that, at a later time in that world, right? So I think for him, it probably was closer to the metaverse than for us. For us, it felt like a massive, well-oiled machine, right? Trying to get everything through. But those worlds are colliding definitely right now, and I think we're going to see more and more of that going forward on many of films, especially the pandemic teaching us all that we can work remotely and from home and be very productive still together without having to be in the exact same room necessarily and all that. I think that people are going to be wanting more content like that, I do believe. So,
right. Yeah. You feel like the technology's getting out of the way a bit slowly, maybe, but to the point where you can play a little bit more than be bogged down in the tech.
You can definitely play a lot more and be a one-man band right now with the technology. But building a film or a big machine around it takes a lot of brute force, at least from our experiences. And like we worked very close with Epic on this one. They're great. They do amazing things and create an amazing sandbox for everybody. But to have the structure it takes to do a game, for instance, or a film is quite different, right? It's a lot of background tracking, let's say. You have to track everything. And I don't know that that's just necessarily inherently built in any of these sandboxes at this point in time. But, I'm happy when people always prove me wrong. I love it because that means we don't have to do it, right? If they've already created it. So if anyone from Epic wants to show me something that they made that's super sweet and everything, you can always call me. But having the amazing artists that we have and the technicians and the engineers be able to build all that stuff, it's like I said, it's a labor of love, even on just this tracking front, not even just the creative front. It's the tracking of everything. So.
What's your job like? What do you find yourself spending time doing?
So the cool thing about the job is that it constantly changes depending on what part of the pipeline you're in. So usually we're always creating new process is kind of what we do, because throughout a film, it's just like any film. You start off and you're talking about a script, right? And we're breaking down the script and all this and all the stuff we have to create digitally, right? So you're creating all these work orders, how you track them, the process of how to review them, how to get them approved, how do you get them ready for motion capturing or whatever it is, right? So that's a process. You have to develop a whole tracking system and note system and all that stuff around that. And then you're ready to maybe capture. And then a new process comes in. You have to capture it. And then you have to create master scenes and all these things to be able to put all that together. So my job is just every time you're picking up the new process is you have to develop this whole new system, I guess, of how you track everything, how do you approve everything, how do you move forward, right? And throughout the film, until you get to the end of the film, you're constantly picking up new parts of the process while trying to keep everything that's happened before that going, because it doesn't stop. The front end doesn't stop until maybe you finish shooting the film or on all that. It just all keeps moving. So my job is being on the front edge of that and helping create the process for that, and then handing it off to the production managers and coordinators and other people to pick up. We do a lot of databasing and a lot of scheduling, scenario running. When you start talking about scheduling, which obviously is all financials, right? And on top of that, but it's also creative in terms of like, what's the creative process? How do we know when a set is done, right? Well, you have to make sure the production designer, first and foremost, loves it. Second, you have to run it by the DP and make sure that they feel like they can shoot on that set, right? Yeah, that's another sign-off point. That's usually a VR review for us. So everyone gets in VR together as a group. They walk a set. Third, you have to bring the director in there and make sure he's able to block out the scene with the DP. And they say, yeah, here's roughly where we're going to do all this action. I like it. It's good. Okay, the set's ready. Well, then we can start laying out our marks for the blocking, and we can actually start animating and moving forward, right? every single one of those steps is a massive review, if not multiple reviews to get past, right? And they all require, oh, here's a bunch of notes, go action them. You go talk to all the VAD artists, that coordinators go and distribute the notes. When is that ready? When is that coming back? We have to schedule the next review. We have to be ready for the blocking scout, So each one of those is constantly hindered by any set of notes or anything given at any given time. So all those different processes have these massive spider webs of other processes that lead up to that, right? So it's like spinning a web, right? If you're a spider, you'd be spinning a web, and everything's connected to that web. And when you catch the fly, then you can that one's past go. You've won. So very convoluted. It's a convoluted job.
Is it starting to take some shape? Is it still something that's just constantly being figured out still?
Well, the reality is every filmmaker is different, and every process will thus be different, because you don't design a single process and say, oh, everyone just work under this process. That doesn't happen in real film, so it wouldn't happen in virtual production. The real reason the virtual production tools are supposed to exist are not necessarily to service the world of virtual production. They're to service these filmmakers being able to work in a digital medium. So we design our tools around our director and our DP and our production designers, right? So every single film, the design of that system is going to be different, and also the approval process might be different because of how they work together, right? So I don't know that there's a one-size-fits-all solution to anything dealing with virtual production, as there isn't in film in general, right? I think it's more along the lines of, there's no gold standard, like this is how you make a movie. And if anyone thinks they have that, I think everyone in Hollywood, all the studios would love to have that. So you should go ahead and patent it and sell it to them. But it's the same with virtual production. It's the exact same thing. It's tailor fit to what type of film it is, what are the needs of the film, what are the tools that are available that you could manipulate to make the film. And all of them don't work for everything. We've had the LED wall conversation before, Ed, you and I. Wonderful tool for quality and everything, but it doesn't mean you're going to go shoot a big action sequence in front of it, right? While it's parallaxing with the camera, because the tool is not quite there yet. Wonderful tool, it's just not ready for that thing yet, right? I think that there's no single way to do any of it. I think sometimes picking the best path per what you're doing is the key, right? And knowing what everything's capable of, right?
Yeah, no, it's really good to hear, because I think that as you said, LED walls are amazing. They're a great tool, but they're just a tool, one tool, and there's many other ways of doing it. And a bunch of the stuff that we worked on together didn't have a wall, or even a green screen in some cases, and still tons of value in virtual production methods.
Absolutely.
What? How do you see it best being approached from, say, from a producing perspective? If you have an idea, taking that idea and deciding which methods to use and which ones to not use.
Yeah, I mean, it truly depends on the script. Anytime you have humans, like live action in the shoot, right? I think the LED wall thing comes up for most people, and it's wonderful because you get all the slide interaction. It's such a beautiful thing to use, but the problem with it is obviously the parallaxing and all that stuff is amazing, but the lag between the camera and the wall is the problem that everyone's trying to crack. And eventually it's going to just work and it'll be wonderful. So it's just knowing the limitations. And unfortunately, I think that's the hard part for everybody, is like you get a brand new sexy toy out there and everyone's like, ooh, shiny, sexy toy. And you immediately want to use it for everything. Like, oh, I want to use this. Yes, this is going to be perfect. But if you don't know the limitations and the people selling it to you aren't telling you the limitations, then you're going to be subject to a lot of roto and replacing all the backgrounds, and maybe even the light interactions not working, or you might be able to see if they're hard surfaced enough that it doesn't match and stuff like that. But, how would you know that unless you've tried it, right? And I think that's the big key. And now there's more data on it. More people have tried it. I think people know the limitations, and they also know what great value it adds. If you're just talking from a strict value standpoint, I think they should use LED walls on every single movie ever made, right? You should use it all the time because the light interaction and stuff is phenomenal. It's so cool. But the reality of building that wall and the expense that goes with that, and then also having to roto out everything and replace the background anyway, you're spending all the money and it's taking away the flexibility. Say, oh, I don't want this world in the background now, I want a new world. Well, it's like, oh, well, the light interactions has to play friendly with the light interaction that we shot on the day. And we all know that a lot of these films are made in post. And what I mean by that is that the design phase of the digital content that we put behind them, the worlds we build, sometimes happen later in the process after you've actually shot the film. Meaning you had a concept going into it, but it's just evolving a lot. There's certain comic movies, I would say, that probably changed right up until you're releasing them, kind of a thing. So, I think it's just knowing who's making the decisions and when is very important. What you're shooting and what style of shooting that is very important. And then you can probably decide if that is actually going to work for you or not. It's kind of the thing.
So. What kinds of people do you need around you to help you make those calls?
Ed Dawson. You need Ed Dawson. You need producers who have had experience in it, and unfortunately, there's just not a ton of them right now. But there's a lot of people out there doing it. I think the hard part of this business and this technology is that most of the people that are approaching you about it are selling it to you, right? And so when you're being sold something, it's easy to leave out some of the things that aren't as wonderful about it, right? So I think that's a big key. You need somebody on your production side who can help you navigate, I guess is the best word for that. And not necessarily the person you're paying financially. Now, we have great trust in all the vendors that I've ever worked with, so I'm not saying anything bad about anyone I've ever worked with, but I'm just saying, like, in general, in a business standpoint, when there's $100 million or whatever on the line, if someone's selling you something, you want to make sure that you've done your research and have an outside perspective who's vetted this if you're not the person who knows it, right? And that's probably close to the reality. Like college students making LED wall shows, I feel like, I know USC has a thing right now, and I think it's great. I think it's amazing. But you need that John Brennan who's at that place, right? You need them to say, oh yeah, you'll never be able to accomplish this because that's not feasible on this wall, right? So yeah, it's tough. I think it's hard because most of the people that know all this technology are actually on the vendor side, and they're the ones selling you the stuff. And of course they're geeked up about it because they made this badass thing, right? And they should be geeked up about it. It's an amazing tool, right? And they're not lying to you and telling you it's amazing, but the limitations thing is the biggest thing, right? If you're going to go in head over heels on a 200 million plus project, and you need to know if it's going to cost you an extra 25 million right off the bat, and there goes your insurance policies on the film to be able to keep making the movie just with the initial conceit that you started with, right? Which is, hey, these walls are not necessarily the background going to the screen because of the way the director shot this now. Now we have to roto it out and replace everything on top of it, and all that.
Right.
Yeah.
So taking somebody with some experience and expertise, like you're going to buy a car, take your Uncle Mike who knows about Pontiacs or whatever. I don't know, I'm going to sound like I don't know anything about cars particularly.
Yeah, me neither.
But take your friend who knows about it. Pay somebody with experience to advise you properly.
Yeah, and there are people out there who do know and who have had to deal with it on the production side. I think even normal production people have had to deal with it now and understand the limitations at least. But those limitations constantly get narrower and narrower. So, eventually it's just going to work. You're just going to plug stuff in and you're just going to move the camera around. Everything's going to move with it in an instant, right? It already does to a certain extent, but like 6 frames of lag is just like, oh man, when you whip a camera around, you really notice it, right? Your brain is so smart with things like gravity. Like everyone is a professional in gravity because you spent your life falling on your face as a child, knowing what gravity looks like and feels like. You've seen your friend eat it on the sidewalk, right? As a kid. So when you're watching animation and you see that the characters look really light and look fake, your brain out it just says fake, right? So same thing when that wall might lag behind 6 frames, your brain will just go fake. And it's not because you have all this experience or a professional and everything. It just, your brain's that smart. It's been trained in the arts of physics, right? And by seeing and believing. So,
right.
Yeah.
Like we see human faces constantly all day long. That's why it's so hard to make digital humans believable.
Yeah.
Because just have that appreciation of a real human face burned into us completely.
Exactly. And you could be really smart and make their skin tone blue, and then all of a sudden you kind of forget about comparing it to a human, right?
Right. Yeah.
You know, James Cameron's the master of mastering what tools to use. He's the best at that, I would say. Favreau as well. I think shout out to Favreau with the LED wall stuff that he's done. I mean, it's hands down. It's like he knows his tools, right? And I think the initial conceit, like I started with before, was that we build the tools for all filmmakers to be able to live and exist and work in this digital world. But with that comes the price of you need someone to produce that person so that these dreams don't get too big for where the tech actually is, kind of a thing. Favreau and Cameron might not need that help, right? They've been in it and on the breaking edge of that, you know, and the cutting edge of that. And so they kind of know it and they know what their limitations are. But they build these worlds and everything efficiently using all that, right? So, you know, it's either one or the other. You can either hire those 2 gentlemen or you can hire some great producers to help with that. So currently we're working with an amazing director right now. He has never worked on any of these big tentpole films like this, and he brings so much to the table just based off of how he directs and who he is as a person. Phenomenal person and everything. We're getting so much out of it. But he's very reliant on all of us to make sure that we're staying within, you know, the realities of what we're creating, right? And he's very much tuned in with everybody, right? And he leans on everyone to do that. So you have to pair those people with people to help guide them through that process. So,
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, in thinking, obviously talking about the LED wall a little bit, the other projects that don't use LED walls that are still virtual production, what helps filmmakers? How does virtual production help filmmakers in ways that aren't LED walls?
Well, you know, my favorite thing is quality. Let me put it this way, it's quality, right? And the best thing you can get out of virtual production, if you're not using LED walls, let's say, and you have a live action shoot coming up, is this idea of tech viz, right? First virtual camera, because one problem we used to have with previs, traditional previs, is you give a note and a shot idea and maybe storyboards to an artist. They go away, create the shot in the camera, and you're like, yeah, no, not like that, like this. Maybe it's too high here. Maybe it's too low. By the end of it, you have a bastardized version of a shot that the director's made. Now, if you can motion capture, if it's a humanoid, or get some sort of motion that's relevant to how they want to block out the scene, virtual camera that, and then the whole world is digital except for the human, let's say in this instance, you can create a tech viz pass so that when you get to the shoot, you know exactly what it would take to recreate that exact shot because the director's already created that shot in a digital form without hundreds of people standing around waiting for them. And before we've built a set for this character to walk on, and before we've already asked for all these different things, right? Before we've ever gotten there, you had a really small previs group and a director and maybe even a DP craft a shot that you want to make. Well, if it's only the contact points of the ground you're building for this character to walk on, you just need to know how far they're walking. You could tell them which piece of equipment makes that camera move and all that. And then you can say, oh yeah, and the lights need to be here. Oh, and if you move the crane there, you're going to block it. See, we're blocking the light here. So you're going to have to change the lighting. And you can actually set up everything before you ever show up to shoot. Now, everyone who's been on a live action shoot knows it feels like it's just molasses. It's just like everything takes so long, right? Well, if you can chisel out some of that indecisiveness or some of that interpretation time where you know that my shot from this shot to the next shot to the next shot are all going to cut together, and I've already made this sequence, right? And I already have these ideas, and I can allow the little inspirations to happen in live action from the actor's performance and whatever else. But I know in my brain how I'm going to make that. Well, we know the setup and where the lights go and all that stuff when you're per setup, per shot, because you've already done it. And the DP's already been in there and placed them in the digital world in the exact set that you have here, right? And already been able to do this, right? So you can gain great efficiency. You can get buy off on everything, meaning we all already believe in this scene before we shoot it. Maybe a lot of these films require like you need to show the studio before you shoot it kind of thing, right? When you're doing big digital scenes, the studio can already sign off on it before you go shoot it. They know where you're going, right? And then all of a sudden, before you actually go spend the money to shoot it, have the actors come out, which we all know actors are expensive, and have everyone there and build those sets and all those things, you can make all those decisions before you get there. And that's where you really save time and money. You don't save it on the essence of like, oh, well, it just costs less up to that point. You save it in terms of like, oh, now we've cut all this together, studio. How do you like our scene or sequence? They're like, I don't like it. Let's start over and change it. Immediately, you just save money by already showing up the first time. Because if they give you that moment of redo this scene, you're doubling up your budget on what that scene in particular, right? So I think it's really about the planning. I think we started off somewhere around planning and these ideas and all the detail that goes into the initial setup, and that virtual camera tech fizz kind of pass and is something that I believe in the most. During the pandemic, we did a film called Morbius, and we did a big scene with the director. He was in Sweden, and we got to do this massive motion capture scene with like 4 of us on a stage, right? We're all masked up in gloves and look like we're about to bake a cake in a prison or something, and we got to motion capture and shoot the whole thing, and with them on Zoom in real time, giving camera direction to us as we're trying to put this together. And it was just, by the time we got to shoot the film and actually kind of got restrictions lifted on being able to shoot it, we took a Jungle Book approach to making that third act, which was just the surfaces they're on. We know where the lights go. We had projectors for the bat shadows and all these things. It's like, it worked extremely well. Sony was really happy, and they knew what they were getting into before they did it. So, it's that kind of approach, I think, that is where you can have savings or be efficient, right? It's not that you're actually spending less money up front. It's that you're taking more of the risk out of it. That's where you actually save in virtual production, in my opinion. So
you're avoiding as many mistakes as you can, avoiding reshoots, which are expensive.
I mean, you hear about all these films just reshooting and reshooting and reshooting. I mean, they can't hold that in. It leaks everywhere. Everyone knows that these films are reshooting constantly, right? And if you have this path down and you have a vision of that from the filmmakers beforehand, and you've shown that to the studio, and they've signed off on it, and then they want to go back and change their mind, you can be like, dude, we showed you this before we ever went out and made it. You had the opportunity then, and then it's not on you. The production team was putting all that together to be like, oh, well, sorry, this isn't what we were going to shoot, and this isn't what we came out with, and all that, right? And it also does empower the studio to be like, well, that's not what you told us you were going to shoot. You showed us a different sequence than this, right? Which is oftentimes what was happening in the traditional previs approach. So,
right, yeah, because you're bringing the filmmakers in to the previous process. There's less abstraction, and they basically can make it. They can be hands-on with it.
Yeah. I'm seeing a question from Jackie here. Let me just go.
Sure. So, you want me to read it for you?
Yeah, sure. I don't know how to read, Ed.
Okay.
So
I can read it.
No, I like it. You have a beautiful voice. I can teach you later. Why don't you read that? Yeah, that'd be good. That'd be good.
So someone's saying, I am curious to know more what principles and constraints Barry would put on visual effects vendors in terms of evolving the world's post-live shoot. and how does one prep the live shoot to allow for this to happen?
Yeah, I think this goes back to really, I think the films that I choose, and I've been extremely lucky. I'll say I rode someone's coattails to get here, right? Joyce was making amazing, massive films before I ever did this, but the things that we focus on, I guess, when I'm picking the film that I want to work on, is that relationship on the front end, right? And is the vendor involved at the very beginning? Are they involved with this idea of some sort of camera capture, tech viz, or whatever it is? How involved the design of the movie, everything on the front end of the movie? So if we're just handing stuff off to you after we've shot it, how can you ask a vendor to be responsible for some plate you handed them that was a crappy plate, right? Whereas where you plan all this out on the front end, and we make a shot and viz, we tech visit through the vendor, and then we go execute the shot, and then you tell us it's not what you thought it was going to be. We'll be like, well, why didn't you say something, at the very beginning that this was not going to be a good thing, right? And so everybody is culpable at that point, right? Everyone has made these decisions together. It's all has our thumbprints on it, as we say around here. It's like everyone's marked the hydrant, and we know that we walk around the block, we can smell our hydrant here. We smell our scent on this hydrant again, because we're just doing it as we planned, right? So it's a quality benefit when you have everybody involved at the front end. A lot of these films will ramp up and have like 8 or 9 vendors. Those are not the shows that I choose to do. I do not believe that those shows are focused on quality. No offense to anybody's film that has 8 or 9 vendors and you've made a masterpiece, because there's tons of people doing it and they are masterpieces, not knocking anybody. But what we like to be involved in is a more intimate setting. Maybe there's 2 or 3 vendors, right? And everybody is involved with which part of the world makes sense for them. But that responsibility factor comes before the shoot, right? And how we execute the shoot, they should have an opinion in that. Because if you're delivering what's going to be excellence at the end of it, then before we shoot it, you need to sign off on it as well. And I've been very fortunate over the past decade plus that those are the types of films I've been able to be on, right? I know that there are a lot of films out there. You go shoot and then you decide the vendor afterwards, right? And it's like, okay, well, how can you blame them? They don't even know what you're shooting, right? So I think that's the big part of it is it's also on the productions. It's not just the vendors. I use this saying a lot with directors. It's like no one ever blamed a paintbrush for a bad painting, right? These vendors are all capable of amazing stuff. This is the reality. Across the board, there's so many amazing vendors out there with phenomenal artists, right? But usually when something goes bad, they're the first people to get blamed. What's like, well, yeah, you were flying around right behind this person and they look like they're Roger Moore parachuting into the scene as James Bond, because your shot is that, right? So instead of someone telling them, yeah, this is going to look like Roger Moore just parachuting in on the shot you're shooting here on the day. And so that being the responsibility of the shot looking bad, they just blame the vendor, right? So I think it goes back to like that relationship at the beginning, so.
Right, being able to see it, experiment with it, and iterate your way visually to proving that it works or not. Getting rid of it if it doesn't early on. Exactly.
Yeah. Or what's the better plan, right? Yeah. Don't parent the camera to the character. That's one good idea, right?
Yeah, we see that one a lot.
Yeah.
Everyone should take note with that one for sure.
Yeah.
So I don't have to say it as much.
Yeah.
That follow feature in Unreal Engine's great, except it doesn't look so great.
I mean, it's cool as a video game because that's what video games do, right? If you're going for that as a look in your film, sure. But the moment this is when physics start to fall apart and everything, the reality thing starts to fall apart once you start doing that. So
right. And some of the movies that you've worked on and we've worked on together have had that kind of, I would say, almost obsessive pursuit of only doing things that could be done in real life and rejecting things that are CG cheats.
Yep, absolutely. That was a big part of both Jungle Book and The Last Lion King was like, they didn't want to see anything happen with the camera that couldn't have been done in real life. except for the big time lapse shot. But even that time lapse shot, well, there's like a 3,000 millimeter lens on the characters when they cross the moon, because that's what it would take to get the moon that big behind the characters. Now, the depth of field was fugazi, we know that. But, Rob Legato on that film chose how would this actually camera be set up with the correct lens? Now, the poor animator is using a 3,000 millimeter lens in Maya, and any animator would be like, yeah, that means the camera was parked football fields away from this action, and any incremental little tick in the camera, it's like a nightmare, right? Immediately, we had lots of complaints from that animator. I won't mention his name, Ingo, but it was always a problem, but that's the reality that we wanted to exist within that film. And I think it works well. The film looked amazing. It's the highest grossing animated film ever made, right? The entity helped it a lot, but it looks great. It's a great film. So.
We have another question. Somebody's saying, when trying to get final pixel, how would you set the limit between pushing it as far as possible and letting visual effects deal with stuff they still handle faster or more easily?
It depends what it is. Like, hair or something. Like if you're trying to do digital things on hair and cloth, freaking nightmare. You better try to get it in camera as best you could, or plan on doing a fully digital character. Which is expensive and very difficult to do, even the simplest of things. It's a tough one, man. It's a sliding chart, I would say. Backgrounds or anything like that. Yeah, lighting on characters is very important in your live action shoot, right? If you're asking visual effects people to relight your shot, shame on you. You should not be asking people to do that. They'll do the best job they can, and they might pull something out of their but it's not necessarily the best path, right, for anything. I think when you're talking about anything you want to be in the film, then yes, it should be as real and photo ready as possible, right? And that includes lighting. So,
right.
Yeah.
Then another question as well. Someone's asking, at what stage of world development, speaking from the asset perspective and basically block out, would you recommend that it's good to run it by the director and the team for VCAM?
Yeah, I mean, if you remember going on all the little scouts and stuff in a bus, and everyone's out there with their little viewfinders, right? Every time you put somebody into the world, they want to hold a camera and they want to look through a lens. And that's the same in real life when you walk out into a location as in a set. And the sooner the better. Now, in a digital world where everything is possible, I think we always try to get stuff surfaced sooner than later in every form. A lot of people want to be like, it's not done yet. Let me finish baking it all the way. And you're like, what if they wanted to put strawberries in the cake and you didn't put strawberries in the cake? We have to tear it apart and put strawberries in the cake, right? Meaning, once they see it and walk a set, it's like a location manager will pick 5 different places to go visit for a set because you have to give them flavors. Well, in the virtual world, it's not like you're building 5 different sets and saying, pick one. It's a lot of labor to build a set. So you need to get them looped in early. Make sure that it works for blocking first and foremost before you start adding great detail. Because if you add all this great detail and they're like, oh, let's change this landscape, don't like this, want something else here, blah, 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 blah. I mean, if you have that much money and time, then yeah, wait until that moment. But if not, get the rough shapes in there, get the reactions about a blocking scout, right? And then you can show them a final set later once they've figured out this works for my action, right? So I think sooner the better. I think it's with live action filmmaking too. You get them in there blocking everything out. And in our world, since it's fully digital films, we take the director in with the storyboard artists, get snapshots out of them, and have them draw over the sets where the action wants to be. And it helps us really maintain more coherence from the animatic, the storyboard, through us shooting eventually, right? So I think it's really important to get in there early to make sure that the sun has a clear path if you're shooting in a forest and all those things, so that you can design the set to be agile with the filmmakers as they're running through shooting it. So you need to know all those things as soon as possible, right, without pissing off the production designer. And Ed knows about pissing off production designers very well.
Yeah, I got some experience doing it. Yeah, to getting your digital chainsaws ready to be able to cut the trees down early.
Yeah.
Do you how do you find, because I've had a lot of times in visual effects trying to show early works to people and had producers not so keen on showing them to the clients previously, because I wanted them to see it so that I don't have to go all the way to the end to find out that it's not
Yeah.
right at the beginning. How do you help with that process in terms of, like, I guess, helping the creatives and the filmmakers, especially if they don't have as much experience in it?
Yeah, I mean, this is the big key to like pipeline, and kind of we touched on it a bit about like processes, right? Like when we go in and talk about blocking out a scene, the set's not finished, really. We just want to know that the geometry works for what they're doing, right? So you kind of need to set that up beforehand. Be like, look, the textures are out of a little bonkers. Sorry about that. The trees are all getting replaced. They're going to be much better than this. But we basically need to know, where are you going to put these characters in this massive world we created, which are really rough geometry shapes right now? Where are you going to put the characters, and where do you envision looking with the camera? So those areas that you're looking with the camera, we can go and plus up and add badass trees and nice shapes and beautiful textures and all this. And we'll clean up the back behind us as best we can. But if you're not looking back there, we don't want to clean it up. That's a lot of labor to clean it up. So you really need to get them set from an early phase, and this is virtual production only. I wouldn't say this for post-production necessarily. You really need to get them set within that. The good news now is a lot of concept artists are working in Unreal, so they're showing these early initial keyframes to directors from Unreal passes, and then maybe painting over them. So you kind of have a lot of that figured out, and they kind of have an idea of that set before they get there, which is wonderful. But you really need to make sure that you're spending all this money in the right place. And if I'm dressing a massive square mile world of a set and I'm only looking at 60% of it, shame on you, because that's a waste of money and a waste of time. And there's a bunch of other worlds and a bunch of other shots and other things needing the attention. So that's a big part of it. I think you have to train the directors and the DPs to understand what kind of notes they're supposed to give in that moment. And that's kind of why you create the processes, the different steps,
Right. So it takes initially culturing and helping set the tone in the beginning of a production, especially with somebody new to it, but also then after that having somebody there to take the care to present everything in the right way and make sure that the director understands what they're seeing and what they want the person to respond to.
And everyone's not going to be happy all the time, right? That's the reality. Usually the production designer's like, well, this looks like crap. This isn't what I want. You're like, yeah, but we have to figure out where we want to plus up in the set, And over time they get it. All the people, the production designers we worked with, man, they usually have a really tough time going through the process. They get really upset and get really angry and like, gosh, you guys are just forcing me to show this stuff and all this. And by the end of it, they're like, oh man, I'm going to do everything this way moving forward, and they really embrace it because they get to really express themselves in a digital way. The DPs have a really tough job on the films that we're making, these fully digital films. They're the ones most compromised, I'd say, because, we can do as best animation we can for the viz phase, but until you put it in a shot and it's going to be in the movie, we're not going to animate all the facial muscles and all these little things that you would get out of a live action person just expressing themselves, right? So they're the ones who are most hindered by all this, and they're the ones who have the toughest time. And then we go in and we change the animation. There's a new idea that comes up. The director's like, yeah, add a little head raise here. Well, that screws up their camera. Then we're touching the DP's camera, and he's like, well, I don't want it to do head. Why didn't the head raise before? Okay. So it's not, you can't worry about pleasing everybody, because on a regular film, you're not pleasing everybody. Every line producer I know is always stressed out, yelling and angry and marching around, trying to with a whip in their hand and being whipped by the people above them. So don't expect it to all be sunshine and roses. You're producing a movie. You're fortunate to be there. It's millions of freaking dollars. you're going to get some pressure. You're going to get gray hairs. It's going to be stressful. But it's important that you are conscious of your overall schedule and the money you have to spend over that overall schedule and how much time and all that, what it equates to. Otherwise, you blow everything on your first set and you don't have enough to make the rest of the movie. That'll find you without a job, right? So yeah, it's a tough one, but you have to kind of get people to buy in to it all and let them understand you're trying to do the best for them, and it's the whole thing. It's not just this one thing, right? That you're building this for. So,
how would you recommend to somebody starting out to how would one become a Barry? How would you get to the point that you're at?
Don't do it. First of all, it's not worth it. Yeah, go do something else that's more fun with your life. I highly recommend to not do it. No, I mean that's not true. I love it. I love the people I work with. I have a wonderful group of friends and working with just absolutely brilliant people, and I believe and love everything I'm doing. But it's not easy because it's just basically it's like being a line producer of digital content, and you're not just dealing with the creative aspects of everything, trying to help build processes around all that to make things happen. You're also dealing with the financial repercussions and answering to the studio, right? So you first and foremost just have to get in those worlds or those groups. Just working on a film is one of the best things you can do, and you'd want to be a coordinator, you'd want to be a production manager, you'd want to work within a virtual production pipeline. And the reality is each film is its own thing. You have to be highly adaptable to whatever it is, and understanding all these tool sets is very important, right? Not that you have to do them. I'm not opening up Unreal for anybody, and I'm not doing anything in Unreal, but I understand what we can and can't do in there. So it's a great question, Ed. I have no idea. I have no idea.
Do what you did, I guess.
Find a Joyce Cox, ride their coattails for as long as you can, and then hope that you fall in line, and work really hard at it and love it and treat it like it's everything, I guess. We work ungodly hours on all these films. You have to really love it, or else there's no point in doing it. And that's why if you don't love it, don't do it, because it's not going to be worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple more questions to round this out. Yeah. One saying, do you use a lot of VR scouting and discovery?
Tons of it. I mean, it's the best way to get a live action director to understand his space in a digital world, right? When we first started this film, we were still in the pandemic, and we had people all over the world participating in a single environment scout as little eggheads. They could see each other while they're in the comforts of their own home, right? And we had people driving those boxes remotely, all networked together through VPN, being able to set scout together, connecting London, New York, here, Montreal, and all these different places at one time. And then once we got into it and everyone could be here together, we used it constantly. So yeah, we use VR a lot on our pipeline.
That's cool. Yeah, there's a cost saving, less airfares.
Yes.
So here's we'll ask this as the last one.
Okay.
This is a good one. As the VAD and TRAD inch closer together every year, what advice would you give to the traditional art department to help them work better / integrate best with the VAD?
I think you remove the two nomenclatures and you just call them an art department.
Yeah.
That's pretty easy. Yeah, I think the future artists are all going in that direction anyway. So it's really just one, like we put the VAD under the art department. It's used to be under a vendor. I think it's better to have them under the art department, let the production designer be in charge, but make sure that those art directors and people understand that they have to answer to one global schedule, right? The schedule drives everything. And don't hate me, but you can hate that schedule all you want. But they have to be under that understanding that we are under a schedule, we are under a limit of resources. You need a production designer who buys into that and understands that, or is willing to go fight tooth and nail with you and to the studio about how much more time and resources they need. And if they want to go make that pitch with you, and you can tell them, you can then be at the end and be like, that's $8 million more, after they give this passionate outcry, support them while doing it. But our job's not to say no. The word produce is to make it happen, right? I'm here to
Right.
produce, not here to say no, so.
They just point out the reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So in terms of our department, skill sets, people in our departments then therefore having to learn Unreal Engine more.
Yeah.
One tiny last question. Somebody's going through the book, the VFX handbook, I guess, the visual effects producer, the visual effects producer by Susan Zwerman, just to get an idea of how producing works in VFX. Is there a similar resource you'd recommend for virtual production?
No, and if there was, I probably wouldn't read it. The reason why is because it's not, I think we said this before, it's not a single road to take, right? It's just, I think you really, to be able to be fortunate enough to be a visual effects producer, you better have put in a lot of years laboring through doing it not on that level, right? I was working as a quote unquote visual effects producer before my title became visual effects producer. And before I got paid for that rate of being a visual effects producer, I was a coordinator, a production manager, a associate visual effects producer, and all these things, right? You really have to work your way up through the bottom. No book is going to teach you how to produce a film. By the time they print the book, the technology is already changing. So virtual productions changed now from when we started our project. I'm sure a great deal. I'm looking forward to starting in the next project and seeing what new, exciting, sexy toys they have for us on the next one, right? What people are dreaming up now. So I think the book idea, while I'm sure there's great things to take from Susan and anyone else who's written a book about it, you're better off probably going and listening and talking to the people who are doing it. And you guys are doing this. The VES has things, and there's a lot of people out there trying to spread the word, I guess, if you will. But there's also a lot of people out there saying this is what it is, when it's like, well, if anyone's saying it's this one thing, I wouldn't listen to them, because it's not one thing, and that's just a silly thought for anything involved with film in general. So I think it's more of how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? It's dependent on who's eating it. So
right. Yeah. Well, wise words, Barry. I appreciate you being here. Is there anything that you want to share with our audience? Anywhere they can follow you, or anything that you want to share?
I'm a pretty accessible person. Always happy to talk to people. You can reach out on LinkedIn or something, and if I have time, I will definitely get back to you, or we'll probably get back to you if I didn't have time and tell you I don't, and tell you when I might have some time. But I'm pretty accessible. I work with a lot of college kids trying to doing internships through the programs with Disney. I've been working with Disney on helping an internship program for post-production and visual effects, so that students have access to that. Usually they're just for productions. So yeah, if you send me a message, I try to connect you with that Disney program if you're younger, and in that internship type of position, or if you're older and looking for something else, you can reach out on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Well,
cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your I know you're a busy man, but I appreciate it. It's cool to get to hang out again. I miss working with you, and
I miss you too, buddy. We'll have to meet in person very soon.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, buddy.
Well, thank you. And,
thank you.
Also thanks to our audience. Thanks for joining us today and asking great questions. I look forward to another episode in 2 weeks, I believe. And if you've enjoyed what you heard today, you can follow us at becomecgpro.com or in our free Facebook group. We will see you all soon. Have a great week out there. Take care, everybody.